Every year you'll have those certain set number of prospects that face a really, really tough decision, and that is whether to return to school for another year or go ahead and try and strike while the getting is good and declare for the NFL draft. And it's not a decision that's made easily in a lot of cases, I don't think. And I don't think it's a decision to take very lightly. In a lot of cases, it's about weighing risk and reward. And for certain guys, what's the reward of going back for another year of school, maybe completing your degree, getting your education, improving and honing your skills, getting yourself more physically and mentally prepared properly for the NFL level, versus striking sometimes where the iron is hot, knowing that if you come back to school another year, you could, in theory, improve, but it gives scouts and front offices another year to kind of poke holes in your game and pick you apart. You get more exposed. Furthermore, you also run the risk of a serious injury derailing that extra year of school. There are certain cases where, frankly, the risk, outweighs the reward for going back. So it can take courage to actually go back. Like, it takes more courage to go back than it does to declare. And a lot of times you'll see guys that do make the decision to go back for another year. You question whether or not that was the right decision. You question whether or not they really should have done that. And you question if they should have just declared the year before. Get teams a little more tantalated about their upside with less film to devour and less film to pick apart. Maybe would have kept their draft stock higher. Sometimes it doesn't pay off, but sometimes it doesn't. I think one example of it paying off for somebody is DeForest Buckner, the big mammoth 6'7", 290-pound defensive end, the senior from Oregon. He had to weigh that decision, and it looks like he ultimately made the right decision. Because this is a guy that, as time goes along, has built up some momentum in terms of his draft position, and his draft position is only going to probably be more locked in and increase even higher as the rest of the draft offseason process continues. I'm very big on DeForest Buckner. There's a lot that I like about his game. Obviously, I like his size and strength. You're talking about 6'7", 290 pounds. Those type of men don't grow on trees every single day, especially when you have the quickness and athleticism that he has for being 6'7", 290 pounds. And he's got an impressive physical package. He definitely passes the eyeball test. He definitely looks the part. And again, those type of guys don't grow on trees. A lot of times you get guys that are 6'7", 290 pounds. They can be a little heavy of foot. They can be a little slow of foot. They're not great, graceful athletes. But I look at DeForest Buckner again with that size and strength, that length, that quickness, that athleticism. It's an impressive physical package. But I like what he does with his body as well and some of the other aspects of his game. I think he does a relatively good job of utilizing his hands as both a run defender and as a pass rusher. I mean, he's not the most purely explosive guy, but some of the stuff he does with his hands, he's a guy to me that's always constantly fighting, and I like those type of guys that are constantly fighting with their hands and constantly trying to shed the block, because that's the only way you're ultimately going to shed the block. I think he's very, very smart in terms of his awareness for the game of football. Here's a guy, to me, that can sit there and recognize that he's not going to get to the quarterback, so he gets his hand up in the passing lane. Here's a guy that seems to have pretty good recognition skills between what's a run versus what a pass is going to be. The type of natural feel for the position and feel for the game that not everybody has and not everybody can learn. There's a couple other things I really like about him is the fact that he's not just a stationary type of player in terms of he just plays on one spot in the field, in terms of the play has to go into that area in order for him to make a play. I think he puts forth outstanding effort. He plays with high effort, plays with a consistently high motor, at least in my opinion, and he's pretty good in pursuit too. Here's a guy that will go seek out and try and make a play. He's not a guy that I consistently saw loafing it, when the plays run away from him. Here's a guy that's still trying to go downfield and make the tackle, make the big stop when it's needed. And when you look at that physical package, you look at that athleticism, and you've got some try to throw in there, that's a very redeeming quality for a big-time prospect like this to have. I still have my concerns about him, as you will with every prospect ultimately. First, being 6'7", he can have a tendency to get very upright. His pad level can be very, very high, and that's a very bad thing because if offensive linemen could get up underneath him, they could push him and guide him and send him where they need to send him. That's something he's going to have to work on because naturally at 6'7", he's going to want to be up very high because it's going to be more comfortable. But if he does that, he's a guy that has the tendency to potentially get moved around and have the offensive lineman that he's facing off against impose their will upon him. It's something he was able to get away with some of the time at the college level just because of his size, his length, his quickness, his athleticism. He's not going to be able to get away with that terrible pad level at the NFL level. It's something he's going to have to work on. I have some concerns about his ability to be a force off of the edge. Here's a guy that played in a 3-4 at Oregon that really that type of system is not conducive to their defensive linemen putting up a lot of big sack numbers. I thought his senior year was impressive because of the fact, in part, his scheme responsibilities and the fact that he was a better pass rusher than, frankly, a lot of people give him credit for. But is he the type of guy that's going to be able to consistently get some pressure off of the edge? I don't know about that. He could use some work definitely on his pass rush moves. With that size, strength, length, athleticism, quickness, the fact that he does, fight with his hands consistently, I'd expect him to have better rip moves and swim moves and spin moves and bull rushes more consistently than he does. His real go-to move as a pass rusher is a bull rush, and he's good at it. I don't know if he's great at it. I would like to see him expand his pass rush repertoire. I would like to see him better utilize his feet to stutter step and get offensive linemen off balance. It's just something I didn't see him do at a high proficiency at the college level at Oregon. Sometimes he can forget his assignment in terms of maintaining contain, and that could be a concern too because he could break down the integrity of the defense. He could throw everybody else's gap responsibilities and assignments into flux because sometimes he could go too far outside. Or on the flip side, sometimes he will go too far inside. And some of that may be the structure and the scheme that he played in Oregon, but sometimes it comes down to the player too. No matter what the call is, sometimes you have to go off of what you feel and what you see. And at times I think he can get too concerned with trying to go make the play that he forgets his core responsibility in his area that he's supposed to protect. And that could be a problem. Also tackling for a guy that's that big. Makes a lot of arm tackles, and I've seen plenty of guys over the past couple of years run through some of those arm tackles. He's going to need some technique work on there. For a guy that big, he shouldn't have as many problems tackling to me sometimes as he does. Now, in terms of an NFL comparison, I'll give you the scouting report of somebody else, a previous draft prospect, and you'll be interested about this. And I think these two guys share this in common, at least as prospects. Prototype 3-4 defensive end all the way. When you look at him, you say, hey, this guy is custom made to be a 3-4 defensive end with size and length and impressive athletic ability for that size and length, a knack for getting their hands up in the passing lanes, guys that play with high effort, guys that have a really good motor, that put forth consistent effort in all areas throughout the course of a game. There are some concerns, though, about getting pressure consistently off the edge, needing to improve, keeping their contain and maintaining the core responsibilities, and needing to expand their pass rush repertoire. I think it's a good summary of DeForest Buckner and what he brings to the table. And it was also a good summary of what J.J. Watt brought to the table in 2011. Now, because it's J.J. Watt, people are automatically going to assume that I'm fucking crazy for making this comparison. I'm making the comparison more so in terms of prospects. This is where J.J. Watt was in a lot of ways as a prospect coming out of Wisconsin in that 2011 draft. There were concerns about whether he was ever going to become a big-time edge rusher. Thought maybe he was going to be a space-eating 5 technique in a 3-4 system. But guys that were prototypical 3-4 ends, played with high motors, seemed to have good intelligence for the game, had a great ability to get their hands up in the passing lane. There's a lot of similarities there, both physically in terms of style of play at the college level between J.J. Watt at Wisconsin and DeForest Buckner at Oregon. Now, because it's J.J. Watt, it's really hard to compare anybody to him because it'll seem crazy, but we forget J.J. Watt was the 11th overall pick in his draft, and people often thought that was too high. There were a lot of people that thought it was kind of crazy. J.J. Watt busted his ass, and he worked incredibly hard and plays with such a relentlessness to become the player that he has become. But it was never a sure thing that he was going to become the player that he has become. It's that simple. So I don't think the comparison is that crazy, especially when you look at who J.J. Watt was as a prospect and DeForest Buckner was as a prospect. That doesn't mean that DeForest Buckner ends up being J.J. Watt. I'm just saying in terms of prospects and their similarities in game, a lot of similarities between DeForest Buckner and J.J. Watt when I watch him on film. I think overall, DeForest Buckner is, like I said, the ideal 3-4 defensive end. And I think, frankly, because of the position that he plays and the fact that a lot of teams drafting high in this draft played the 3-4, it really helps his draft stock. Because you got teams like San Diego that played the 3-4. Jacksonville doesn't play a 3-4, but based off of the type of defensive end that they like sometimes, I think DeForest Buckner has a chance to go there. Baltimore at number 6, they play a 3-4. DeForest Buckner would seem to make a lot of sense, similar to how Haloti Ngata did many years back. San Francisco plays a 3-4. Here's an Oregon guy. Chip Kelly was a coach there. You get the idea. I mean, you got the Bears at 11. So you've got a lot of teams that in those first 11 picks play the 3-4. That bodes well for DeForest Buckner's draft stock because many of those teams picking high do play a 3-4, or they play a system like in Jacksonville or maybe even a Miami, where he would make a lot of sense as a 4-3 power left defensive end. Ultimately, he does pass the eyeball test. I think there's no question about that. Teams are going to love his size, his athleticism, his effort level. They're going to be concerned about his pad level, his leverage, his lack of an expanded pass rush repertoire. They're going to have some concern about his overall upside as an edge pass rusher because they're not sure that he's going to be able to get outside consistently, and it's a legitimate concern. I think ultimately, though, you'll see a lot of lazy comparisons to his teammate from Oregon, Arik Armstead, who went 17th overall to the 49ers in the 2015 draft. But that's a lazy comparison. That comes down to the school that they played at and the position they played at, and to me, that's where the similarities end. I thought, if you remember last year, that DeForest Buckner was a better prospect than Arik Armstead a year ago. And I most certainly think he's a hell of a lot better player and overall prospect, and in particular, pass rusher now. I think people sleep on how effective he was as a pass rusher in 2015 and how effective of a pass rusher, frankly, he could be at the NFL level. For my money, in my opinion, DeForest Buckner is the number 1 defensive lineman in the 2016 NFL draft. I think his draft range is somewhere between pick 3 to San Diego and absolutely no lower than 11 to Chicago. He shouldn't really drop out of the top 6, if I'm being so bluntly honest. Either San Diego should take him, even Dallas maybe should take him in that 4-3. Maybe they'd want to play him inside a defensive tackle. I don't know. Fucking figure it out. Jacksonville makes sense. Baltimore makes a world of sense. If teams are good at what they do and they're good at scouting prospects and they're good at putting together a draft board, DeForest Buckner should not drop out of this top 10. If he does, he's going to be an absolute steal and teams are going to look foolish. That's my opinion. I'm very, very high on this guy. I know some people that are lukewarm on him, some people that are really, really hot on him. I'm in that category. I'm really, really hot on him. I look at the size, the length, the athleticism. I look at the fact that he played for several years already in a 3-4, so he's not transitioning to a new role. He's already comfortable in that type of system with that type of expectation, with that type of responsibility. And I think he still has upside and room to grow. For me, he has more overall upside than a Joey Bosa does. And I think he ends up long-term being the better player at the NFL level. Call me crazy, I know, but that's just my opinion.